Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the session, Building Products with ArcGIS. My name is Thomas Fair. I'm the CTO for our partner program, and I'm joined with Max Payson, who's a solution engineer on the startup team. So the purpose of this session is really to get oriented on product patterns with ArcGIS. We're really going to go into detail on different conceptual architectures that you can follow to build different types of products, and we'll also be going over some really amazing prototype and sample applications that Max has built to demonstrate a lot of these concepts and patterns that are available to you as developers. Prior knowledge for the session is definitely have seen our Dev Summit plenary, and definitely after this is attending and watching our different product sessions that are available. Just a quick disclaimer here at the beginning: some patterns only apply to associates or partners, and this will be noted on the slides. Check out the going to market session for more information. What this really means for you as a developer is that there's some patterns that require different licensing models that are available to associates and partners. And all organizations have the ability to apply for to be an associate or a partner, and the go-to-market section is really going to cover that in detail. But of course, you can always reach out to Max or myself should you have any questions. There's three core patterns that we are really going to review and cover today as part of this session. The first is Extend. And many of you extend a customer's GIS across desktop, web, and mobile today. And we'll discuss and review the different opportunities that are available to you as developers with ArcGIS. This is especially important with Extend because this gives you the ability to reach basically all existing Esri customers with your products and offerings. And there's so many new opportunities available today, and many patterns that you're following today that will continue in the future. So extending is a great opportunity as a developer with ArcGIS. Next is the ability to embed. This is really where we're seeing a lot of growth and opportunity when it comes to organizations developing with ArcGIS technology. You can build these focused industry solutions, many of them being cloud or SaaS solutions that embed geospatial infrastructure. And there's basically your opportunity to do things from location-based services all the way to more advanced GIS capabilities in your cloud solutions to provide customers your comprehensive applications or solutions that live alongside a customer's GIS. So there's many exciting opportunities here when it comes to being able to embed geospatial infrastructure in your cloud solutions. And finally is content. We're seeing really some exciting patterns emerging when it comes to content. I mean, together with cloud infrastructure, with our geospatial infrastructure, we're seeing content providers be able to deliver content globally. And we're going to talk about, what do those patterns look like for how you can deliver vector, raster, and real-time content with Esri technology. And really looking at this as well beyond the traditional patterns of a clip and ship model, but also being able to provide, live web services off of your cloud platform. Maybe that's AWS or Azure. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in first with Embed. And I'll turn things over to my colleague, Max, who's going to talk more about that.
All right. Thanks, Thomas, and hey, everyone from the other recording studio. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about common patterns for embedding ArcGIS in your products. But before diving into that, let's talk about a couple reasons why you might want to embed ArcGIS. And we're going to do this for also with Extend and delivering content so that you have an understanding of which approach might be best for the products that you're looking to build. So the reasons why you might want to embed ArcGIS is one, to add new capabilities into your solution. There's a whole ecosystem of mapping and location intelligent capabilities within ArcGIS, and you could potentially add those to add value to your users. In some cases, that might be as simple as just adding a map to a website. In some cases, maybe some cool interpolation algorithm against data that you're generating. But one reason to embed ArcGIS is to add new capabilities. Another reason that comes up very frequently, at least in our work, is to solve technical challenges. So companies will come to us and say, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to solve this really complex routing problem. For example, does ArcGIS have a solution for that? And oftentimes the answer is yes. And so you can solve technical challenges to realize the vision for your product by embedding some ArcGIS capabilities. And then the other two are really about efficiency. You're all much smarter developers than I am, so you can probably engineer whatever you'd like, but in some cases that might be inefficient, and you could save on development costs or get to market faster by embedding some software that ArcGIS has included with it. Okay, so those are a couple reasons why. Let's now switch into the components of ArcGIS that you can embed. And we generally break this out into three buckets. The first is location services, the second is infrastructure and identity, and the third is advanced server capabilities. And we're going to talk about each of these in the ensuing slides and not just read off this little bulleted list. So to start with location services, if you're familiar with the mapping space, you're probably familiar with these capabilities, but it encompasses adding 2D and 3D maps into your applications, searching and geocoding, generating directions and routes, accessing authoritative data and curated data within your system, whether that is land cover classifications or CDC social vulnerability indexes. There's a bunch of curated data that is made available to you as a developer as a service. And then against that data and the data that you maintain, there are also interactive spatial analytics capabilities. The way that these are all delivered is via ArcGIS APIs and SDKs, as well as services that are hosted in ArcGIS Online that you can just call out to. So the schematic or high-level architecture for this, excuse the diagrams, is pretty straightforward. You have your product stack, your back-end server infrastructure, your front-end client applications, and you can use the ArcGIS SDKs to add mapping capabilities into those end user applications, whether that's to draw a map or maybe add some interactive data-driven exploration. And then optionally, those ArcGIS SDKs can also call out to those services that are hosted in ArcGIS Online. And that could be the geocoding service or the world routing service. You don't need to use the SDKs to call out to those hosted services. They're just REST APIs. You can call them. You can call them directly. Generally, accessing these services is scoped to your application. So when a user accesses the geocoding service, for example, they're doing that on your behalf. And the way that works mechanically is that we give you a client ID and client secret that basically acts as the password to your app, and then you hard code those in to generate tokens that you can then use to access the services. So since that is a username and password, you generally want to protect it and make sure it's secure. One way to do that is to use a proxy on the back end so that it's not exposed to the client applications. And ArcGIS Online has a hosted proxy that you can use as a convenience. But in some cases, you also can just access services directly. So base maps, for example, don't necessarily require a token. You can just call out to the service once you have a license. Okay. Bucket number 2 is infrastructure and identity. This is what we would consider to be the core of the ArcGIS platform. So this is where you're starting to host your data within ArcGIS and manage it and interact with it there. And then also using ArcGIS's notion of identity to control what users can access which data sets, what they can do against those data sets, and just generally the permissions that those users have within the system. The nice thing about this is that it's all very tightly coupled, so there are very fine-grained access controls and permission controls against what your users can do within the location capabilities exposed by ArcGIS. The other component to this is that when you start to work with identity, you can also optionally tack on Esri applications to ArcGIS accounts. So a user can log into your app, but they could also log into a Esri app, and that gives the potential for building out a more comprehensive workflow, I guess would be how I would describe it. And then the last one is spatial analysis. It's back. It's in almost every slide. And the reason why I include it again here is because once you actually start hosting data within ArcGIS, there are more analytical capabilities that are available to you, because a lot of the operations work against the data at the database or at the service level. The way this is delivered is through ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise, sort of our two core platform editions. ArcGIS Online is the SaaS version, and then Enterprise is the licensed software version that you deploy in your infrastructure, almost always the cloud nowadays. One important note is that if you're using infrastructure and identity in a commercial product, you need to be an associate or a partner. And there's another technical section on licensing where you can learn more about this. But just note that to use these in a commercial product, you need to be an associate or a partner. Okay, so the way that these solutions generally get built looks more like this schematic on the slide. So the first step is kind of laying out the framework and the components within ArcGIS to orchestrate and build out your solution. So that involves creating users, that involves adding those users to the groups, and then sharing items to the appropriate groups, and as a result, the appropriate users. So that's how you are able to control which data and other items that users have access to, is by adding them as users in ArcGIS and then adding them to groups that have access to the items. Those items also generally sit on top of services, so then the services are the actual APIs that you interact with in ArcGIS, and the items are sort of the security and the metadata around those services. So that step one, basically build out that infrastructure or that framework within Online and Enterprise. And then once that's there, users can start interacting with the services and the items. So they go to your application, they log in with their user account, and then they can start querying the data or editing the data that you've made available to them. The fourth note here is just using ArcGIS SDKs. So you can use those ArcGIS SDKs again to build the mapping capabilities into your application to render web maps with WebGL, etc. Those SDKs can also, they provide a nice abstraction against some of these other arrows, but they aren't necessarily required. They just add a bunch of cool capabilities into your applications. A couple notes on this slide. One, if you're familiar with Online Enterprise and you see creating users, groups, items, and services, you might think that's a lot of clicks. The good news is a lot of this can be automated. In particular, the Python API provides a very nice automation library for administrative workflows, and there are a couple technical sessions on that. So know that you can basically set up deployment scripts and more to automate a lot of these processes. Another important note that especially comes up a lot with partners is the notion of a single or multi-tenant ArcGIS deployment. So a single tenant deployment is where you have one customer organization that corresponds with one ArcGIS Online instance or one enterprise deployment. But in some cases, we have partners that are building out multi-tenant systems where multiple customer organizations belong to one online or enterprise deployment. And the way that those tenants are controlled is through groups. So customer organization A, all their users belongs to group A, and they can't see any of the data that's within group B or group C. So generally speaking, you can do single or multi-tenant deployments in your products. And the reason to do multi-tenant would be just to simplify the administration of your environment because you have less environments to worry about. The reason, yeah. Okay, and then another note is generally speaking, it's easiest to use Esri sign-in. So when you give users an ArcGIS identity, also giving them the credentials, they can log into your app and access the services. We have a whole session on authentication and authorization that I recommend you check out to learn more about that note in particular. And the last note is that this is also how Esri apps work. So if you're familiar with ArcGIS Hub, the user interface is almost entirely through the hub. There are these initiatives that have corresponding applications and data sets, and users build these initiatives and interact with initiative pages. Under the hood, that's actually provisioning out groups for the initiatives, and then the items and services get shared with those groups and made available into the initiative. So under the hood, it's using these same ArcGIS mechanics, but that's not what's exposed to the end users. So the reason I want to bring this up is that we're in the same boat, right? So the way that our product teams are building these geo-enabled systems is very much the same way that you as an associate or partner could build out your whole platform. Bucket number 3, advanced server capabilities. So these are all capabilities that come with ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Server licensing roles. So if you'd like to host data or you want to do large-scale image hosting and analysis, start processing and analyzing real-time data, or doing massive volume distributed big data analytics, then there are server licensing roles that will allow you to add these capabilities into your backend infrastructure. If you're familiar with the server licensing roles, then the product names for these are ArcGIS Server, Image Server, GeoEvent, and GeoAnalytics, and that's how these capabilities get delivered, is through those server licensing roles, and then you as a developer can interact with that server technology through APIs and SDKs, as well as connected administrative applications. Another important note here is that this, if you're using these capabilities in a commercial product, you have to be a partner. So this is probably a oversimplified architecture. Excuse the the very rough diagrams on all these slides, but the way it works is you deploy ArcGIS Enterprise with the appropriate server licensing role into your infrastructure, and then you can just consume the services that get exposed within the rest of your platform, whether that's on the front end with an application built with the ArcGIS SDKs or on the back end services as well. You can authenticate into these services at the app tier or the user tier. So in some cases, you might have a custom geocoding service against your own authoritative address data that you want to expose to all your users. And so you hard code credentials for them, and everyone just interacts with the same geocoding service. That's one option. Another option is you can again use that notion of ArcGIS users and identities to control the access to these services and items emitted by these server roles in the same way that you would on the previous slide. Nowadays, this is almost entirely a cloud-based deployment, and we have a whole set of white papers and documentation on architecture best practices, talking about things like disaster recovery and high availability. So it's not just this one sort of abstract server box on a slide. There is more in-depth guidance in how you could deploy this into your infrastructure in production. Okay, so that's a quick overview of some of the patterns for embedding ArcGIS capabilities into your apps, but slides are kind of boring, so let's walk through a demo that shows each of these in progressive succession. And the way that we're going to do that is in the context of a maintenance request demo. So imagine that there's a worker who has maintenance requests in the Cambridge area specifically for Cambridge Public Schools, and they need to generate a route between their maintenance requests. That's kind of the use case here. So we'll start with just a location services demo to showcase what this would look like using just location services. So let's quickly open up the developer screen as well, because we'll look at some network requests. But basically the way this works when we refresh the page is there's a GeoJSON file that I have on my server, in this case running on localhost, that contains the maintenance requests. I load that onto the map with the JavaScript API. That JavaScript API is also rendering the underlying base map, and it's providing a wrapper to call out to the routing service. So when I want to optimize a route between all these outstanding requests, I can click optimize a route. We'll see a route show up, and we can see that we made a request to a utility routing service, which, just as a quick note, is one of those ArcGIS Online hosted proxies, so that I don't have to worry about passing my client ID and client secret around. So this is a really basic workflow. You'd probably build out a lot more functionality, but hopefully it communicates the idea. And the way that this is built is following this sort of schematic. So ArcGIS JavaScript API is rendering the maps and building out the user interface. That's requesting map tiles and routing that are hosted within ArcGIS Online. And then it's also loading in a GeoJSON file into the application containing the maintenance requests. Now, if we want to take this a step further, we can start working at the infrastructure and identity tier. And so this comes with a couple different things. One of them is, instead of working with a static GeoJSON file, we can now host a live feature service to manage the vector data, which allows us to edit the data and then basically maintain it and disseminate it. So you'll see how that comes in. And then the other part is that we can have different users that have different permissions against that data set for specific workflows. So in this case, we'll have an anonymous form to submit a new maintenance request, and then also a dispatch user and a worker user. So let's start by just submitting a request. We'll do it for Fletcher Maynard, and we'll assign it high priority. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a new record in the maintenance request feature service. So we'll click submit, and it was successfully submitted. Now we can log in with the dispatch worker. So we'll sign in with a different account, in this case EPC dispatch. And we now have a different UI where we can see those 5 assigned maintenance requests from the location services demo, as well as a unassigned new maintenance request, which belongs to the Fletcher Maynard Academy. So here, logged in as a dispatch worker, I can now assign this request to the EPC worker, click update, and we'll see that the service is now updated to make that assignment. Okay, last part is we're going to log in now with the worker user. So we'll click log in again, sign in this time with EPC_worker. And now when we go back, we see those same outstanding requests that were in the GeoJSON file, but we also see that high priority maintenance request for Fletcher Maynard Academy. And again, we can optimize a route. It looks surprisingly complex. But the way that this one works is, now instead of fetching data from a GeoJSON file, we're interacting with a live service hosted within ArcGIS Online. So from that live service, anonymous submissions can go in, and dispatch editors can make edits to assign workers to the request. And then that data is then shared with the appropriate users through groups. So when the dispatch worker signs in with their account, they can see the layer where they can assign maintenance requests, and then when the worker signs in, they can see only those maintenance requests that have been assigned to them. And the ArcGIS JavaScript API is again orchestrating it and still calling out to services hosted within ArcGIS Online, map tiles, and routing. We can quickly look at what this looks like in ArcGIS Online as well. So here I'm logged in with, let's say, my developer account, not a end user account, and I have a couple different feature layers. Or there's one feature layer, and then there are views which reference that same feature layer but have different permissions against the data. So there's a public maintenance request layer that's shared publicly. This is the one where people are able to apply edits and submit requests. Then there's a private one that is only shared with myself and then with a group of dispatch workers. And this has separate permissions. So while the public one, you can only add new records and you can't actually see any of the data, we can quickly see at how this is defined, actually. So we can see here's the public layer. People can edit it, but they can only add features and they can't see any features, right? So that's how we're able to create a maintenance request form. This has separate permissions where the viewers can actually view all the data and also edit and assign requests. Then finally, we have this worker layer that's shared with the worker group, and it only shows data that belongs to that specific worker, so that they only see the maintenance requests that are relevant to them. Okay, now let's take it one step further, where we're going to add in GeoEvent, which is the real-time advanced server capability. And here, rather than using a dispatch worker, we're going to automatically assign a worker if the request is close to an existing request that worker has. That makes some logical sense, right? Where if you're working at a school and then there's another request that comes in, a short walk down the block, then it makes sense to assign that one to you. So to show how this works, let's submit two requests. One to Cambridge Ridge, and we'll mark that as high. And then we'll submit another one, this time to Graham Parks and Schools. This time, we'll also make it high. Okay, so now that this has been submitted, what we should see is that when we log in with the worker, requests have been assigned to them, but only if they're close to existing requests. So we'll sign in with the worker. Okay, and now we see that there are, let's close this, that there are 7 outstanding requests. So here's the Fletcher Maynard Academy from earlier, and then here's that new Cambridge Ridge and Latin School, which we can assume got automatically assigned because it's in close proximity to this request. But that third high priority request that we created for Graham and Parks didn't make it onto the list because it wasn't close to any existing request for the worker. And again, can optimize the route. This time it looks a bit cleaner. So the way that this one works is now, instead of those anonymous requests going directly into the service that then get dispatched, instead they go into GeoEvent server, where GeoEvent automatically detects if that request is close to an existing request, and if so, it tags the appropriate worker, and if not, then it just submits it as if it came in directly. So we put this GeoEvent server basically in the middle to automatically streamline that processing. And we can take a look at what that looks like here in the GeoEvent Manager, where the request comes in. We map it to the appropriate schema. We tag it with a worker if there's a nearby worker. We transform those tags again into the appropriate schema, and then output that into the request service so that the workers and dispatchers can view it. Okay, so that was the overview of the demo. Hopefully that's helpful, basically walking through each of those steps. And now we have a pretty, I would say, robust or comprehensive use of some of the ArcGIS technologies that you can embed within your products or solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Thomas, who's going to talk more about extending ArcGIS for your product.
Thank you, Max. Those are some awesome applications and great information. Next, what we want to do is talk about how you can extend ArcGIS, and this is across desktop, web, and mobile. So why would you do this? Well, you can extend ArcGIS to have native integration with end user workflows. So there's many customers today who are using ArcGIS products, but they need your add-in or your app or your widget to help them with their workflows. You can really magnify value through the ArcGIS ecosystem. You can also use existing licenses and infrastructure. So this is especially important when it comes to when you're selling into a customer account. Many of the times they might already have ArcGIS Pro. So you just sell your add-in to them. And you're extending a customer's existing GIS. So you're able to very easily deploy your application into an existing ArcGIS Enterprise deployment or ArcGIS Online deployment. Let's take a look at the components here. When it comes to the clients, on the desktop, this is really about ArcGIS Pro. That's really the focus there, and you can create ArcGIS Pro add-ins. When it comes to Web App Builder on the web, you can create widgets. And out of the hundreds of thousands of applications built with Web App Builder today, many of those are using partner widgets. We also have the new Experience Builder, which is just released, that enables you to create custom widgets as well. For field apps, we have app linking. We'll talk more about that, but it enables you essentially to have a custom mobile app that links with other Esri apps to create a comprehensive field solution and support field workflows with both your application and Esri applications. And of course, you can create custom web and mobile apps, and there's different APIs and SDKs for you to use to achieve that. Looking at ArcGIS Enterprise only, ArcGIS Enterprise does offer some additional opportunities for you to extend across our server products. Starting first with the ArcGIS server, you can create server object extensions or SOEs or server object interceptors or SOIs, as well as GP tools. So you can create your own geoprocessing tool, publish that to ArcGIS server. When it comes to GeoEvent, and this is really, GeoEvent's about connecting to real-time data, whether it be sensors or land, air, and sea moving objects. You can create your own connectors to your own data sources and to be able to stream that into GeoEvent, or you can create your own processors as well. GeoAnalytics, you can utilize Python tools to chain different functions together, and of course do automated processing of data. And an image server enables you to provide, you can create custom raster functions and models. Taking a look first here at ArcGIS Pro add-ins. Building an add-in, you have the full capability access to what ArcGIS Pro offers and provides. You have the ability to control the user interface and user experience. So you can say within your add-in tab what tools are available and what those experiences are for different tools that you develop. And you can also connect them with different data sources. The way this works is a customer has ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise deployed. You connect in with your ArcGIS Pro add-in with the customer's deployment. That then connects in with the customer's GIS. So with your Pro add-in deployed to a customer's ArcGIS Pro deployment, you can connect into their GIS, pull in data and layers and other content. And then various, you can connect in with your own product infrastructure, your own data sources, and provide that customized experience for end users. With Web App Builder, you can create custom widgets and themes. This is supported for both ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise platforms. There's an extensible framework for developers to utilize. Many of you are probably already doing that today. There's deployment differences between ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise, which we'll talk about in a second. And there's an opportunity for you to list widgets on the marketplace. As a developer, you can have your own, develop your own custom widget and then deploy the widget to a web server, register that widget with Portal, and then integrate the widget with Web App Builder. And this is how the ArcGIS Enterprise pattern works. With ArcGIS Online, it's a little bit different in a sense that you can't host custom widgets today in ArcGIS Online, so you would deploy the widget with your application to a web server and register that with ArcGIS Online. You also have the ability to create custom web and mobile applications. So you can have a standalone application or have a full stack deployed. The user authorizes the application to access ArcGIS on their behalf. Let me fix that. You can also provide custom web and mobile applications. You can do a standalone application or have a full stack. The user authorizes the app to access ArcGIS on their behalf. The app reads and writes services, and you can use app linking. So what this looks like is basically you have your product infrastructure that's using maybe ArcGIS runtime or our JavaScript API. You have an application that's built, it's connecting into your backend infrastructure. The user then logs into your application, initiating an OAuth 2 kind of named user login. Once that's accomplished, and you can then consume secure hosted services and web maps from the customer's GIS. And of course, your application and infrastructure can also then ETL data to hosted feature services once the user is authenticated. So you could maybe have data managed in your infrastructure, could be spatial and non-spatial data that you're pushing over to that customer's GIS. App linking enables you to basically, as I stated earlier, is integrate Esri mobile applications with your mobile application. So you can kind of support end user workflows. The best example of this is you have a field application and you want to provide navigation turn-by-turn directions to an asset in the field. You could app link out to Navigator for ArcGIS and provide that navigation turn-by-turn experience. Just an aside here, working with users is similar, whether extending or embedding. You still have the OAuth 2 named user login, you still consume services in a similar way, and you still can ETL data back and forth from ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. When you're embedding, instead of the customer owning that ArcGIS Online or Enterprise deployment, you're actually just controlling those, the ArcGIS Online and ArcGIS Enterprise-based deployment. It just really comes down to what are you as the developer managing, and what is the customer managing from a product and infrastructure standpoint. So with that, I would like to hand things over to Max, who's going to walk you through some examples.
All right, thanks, Thomas. Hey, everyone. I'm back with another demo on extending ArcGIS. And before diving in, I forgot to mention earlier that we're staying a bit light on the source code because we want to focus on the high-level concepts, but the source code and all of its ugly glory will be posted on GitHub, so you can check that out as well. So with that, this demo is showing two different interfaces to a custom enrichment API. One is a web application where the user can select what data they want to enrich, and then another is a custom geoprocessing tool embedded within Pro, where similarly the user can select which data they want to enrich. And the goal here is to show basically the same application implemented in two different ways to understand a couple different options for extending ArcGIS. So with that, let's start with Pro. So here I have my EPC Demos 2020 Pro project open, and I'm signed in with my Esri Startup Program account. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this enrichment service basically just to enrich some data. And so I'm going to add some data to the map. Here we can see some of those layers from my earlier demonstration. And so I'm going to add, in this case, just the 50 largest cities that I've already added before, so I'll remove it so it's only on there once. In this case, just the 50 largest cities, and it's not the best symbology, but you can see where they are. So let's say I want to enrich this with my custom geoprocessing tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Geoprocessing pane and then open up that tool where I can select the points or areas of interest I want to enrich. In this case, the enrichment is against a hosted weather service, so it's detecting whether or not there's a weather event in my areas of interest, and so I can select certainty category and then output location. So I could optionally draw new points, lines, and polygons directly on the map, but in this case I will select 50 largest cities, certainty category, how about in this case likely, and then an output location, which for this will be within my EPC Demos 2020 geodatabase, which we'll just call output. Okay, so now my parameters are all set up. We'll click run, and this will call out to the enrichment service. So while this is running, the thing to point out here is that this is a custom app or workflow that I built directly into Pro, and so I, as a user, would be able to use all the capabilities here directly within Pro to interact and build out the data sets and build essentially a comprehensive workflow around this enrichment API. All right, so let's check out the output. Here we see that we got some results where there are weather events for the 50 largest cities, and if we check out the attribute table, we can see what those events are. A couple flood warnings, tornado watch, all with different severities, and then certainties as well, and then a link to learn more. Okay, so the way that this works, just to quickly look at the schematic again, is in Pro, I can connect to ArcGIS to access the data where I maintain the data. In this case, I'm connecting to ArcGIS Online to pull in that layer representing the 50 largest cities, and then I'm inputting those 50 largest cities into my ArcPy custom geoprocessing tool. That geoprocessing tool is getting information about the logged in user and using that information to get a token from my custom enrichment backend. And so the way this works, we'll dive into this a bit more in another authentication session, but the way this works is basically from the geoprocessing tool, I can get a token for the user, which I pass to the backend, and then the backend validates that token exists for the user, so the user is who they say they are, and in that case authenticates them and returns a token to the API back. Then the final part is I use the layer and the other inputs to make a call to the enrichment service with the API token I just received and get the enriched data back as a result. So this is one example. The second example is the web-based workflow. So now let's instead open up a browser, and here I'm logged in again with that mpayson_startups account within ArcGIS Online. I can see my content, etc. And one of the cool features within ArcGIS Online is there's this app switcher. So this is how, for example, end users get to the Living Atlas, or how they get to the new Map Viewer beta is by opening up this app switcher and selecting the app. And so one of the apps that I have registered here is my EPC Data Export app demo. So I can click this from within ArcGIS Online, and that link basically points at my app's URL and opens it in a new tab. So now I'm logged into the web version of this enrichment workflow. So again, I can select a category. In this case, I'll do likely, and I can similarly select an area or points of interest. So for example, I could sketch geometries on a map. Maybe I want to know about this line segment, but we'll pretend that's not actually the case for now, and instead use an existing layer. So here I'm using the JavaScript API to query items, both maps and layers that I have access to. And so I'll search again for those 50 largest cities and click on it and pull it into my map. So this is basically querying the data that I have access to in ArcGIS Online, and then once I make a selection, pulling it into the application. And now in my area or points of interest selection UI, I can select to enrich the 50 largest cities, click enrich, and this will go back to that same API and perform the same enrichment process. So we'll give it a hot second, and here we get back the results where we can see the different cities, the severity, and if we click, for example, we can see that there's a severe tornado watch in Louisville with likely certainty. Okay, so how does this one work? It's conceptually quite similar to Pro, right? So now what's happening is from the JavaScript API that's served out over a static server, I implemented the named user OAuth login. So I am Payson_startups login with my ArcGIS account, which then allows the JavaScript API to connect into ArcGIS Online and also receive a token for the user account. I then, similar to before, exchange that token for an API token on my backend. The backend ensures that that user and the token are valid and everything matches up, and in return returns a API token. And then I use that API token along with the parameters that I click through in the application to call back to the enrichment service and get the results from that custom enrichment service. So this shows basically two implementations of the same workflow. You can tell that there are slightly different benefits. Having a Pro application really embeds the workflow directly into that native desktop environment, whereas the standalone web application might be a little more lightweight and focused, and I can build a more tailored UI specific to the workflow that I would like to create. So with that, that's the end of my demo, and I'm going to turn it back over to Thomas to talk about content with ArcGIS.
Thank you, Max. All right, so let's talk about delivering content. What we're going to do is really focus on vector, raster, and real-time content. We have some specific guidance for these areas, but there, of course, is other content types that you might be working with that are definitely opportunities to be delivered with ArcGIS. So why deliver content with ArcGIS? Well, you can provide native services and use some of our provisioning capabilities. So you can take your premium content and get that delivered to our customers. You can integrate with user workflows. So bring your content right into ArcGIS applications that users are using in their workflows to support their business. It's obviously huge value for you to be able to get your content integrated with their workflows. And magnify value through the Esri ecosystem. Reach, whether they're on-premise, deploying in the cloud, or using Esri SaaS, reach all Esri customers. Maximize, the value of your content and your reach. Taking a look at the components here, when it comes to our data services, so you can, for vector data, this is really what we call, the content will be delivered as feature services. And this can be from ArcGIS Enterprise or ArcGIS Online. There are some technical deployment differences, of course, between ArcGIS Enterprise and Online, but with vector data, there's an opportunity for you to deliver using both. When it comes to imagery, You can deliver as image services or tile services using our ArcGIS image server role. And for delivering real-time data, you can do this as stream services or feature services using ArcGIS GeoEvent Server, which is a server product that you can deploy in your own managed infrastructure or cloud infrastructure. And now newly released is our ArcGIS Analytics for IoT, which is a SaaS-based offering for real-time content with ArcGIS Online. From a provisioning standpoint, you can register a service in the user's GIS. So you take any of these services that you might be serving and you just register that in right into the customer's GIS so they can start using that in applications and in their workflows. You can also share a service via the ArcGIS Marketplace, or you can do sharing with groups as needed. And you, of course, can export data to the customer's GIS. Some customers still want a copy of your data deployed into their GIS, and that will continue in the future. And my best advice to you is to just to understand what your customers need, and you're probably going to end up with a multiple approach to just really maximize your reach of your content and data. Taking a look at first how you can register services with the customer's GIS. It works really with any service type that's natively supported by ArcGIS. You are not going to share your data publicly, so you're going to need to create credentials for your users. And user controls colleague access. So, what does that really mean? Well, when you register that service in with the customer's GIS, at that point, that service that's been registered and authenticated can then be shared with other users internally. So let's say an administrator, let's look at this diagram as an example. So in your infrastructure, you've published some services and to an image server in this case, and you've registered those services into the customer's ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. So they have an image service. In order for them to register that service, you provided them a login, a username and password. So when they register that service, they enter the username and password. Now, from that point forward, that service, that new item, can be used throughout the entire ArcGIS line or enterprise organization. The way within that organization access is controlled to that service is by that administrator and who they decide to share that to. So they may say, oh, this image service can only be used by this group within my organization. They would use the sharing model within ArcGIS Line and Enterprise to control access to that content. This approach and model, though, of embedding image server is available just for partners. Because in order for you to embed image server or any of our servers in your infrastructure, there's a license agreement that has to be put in place between Esri and your organization. When it comes to sharing a service, you can it could be an ArcGIS Online hosted service or a registered service within Online. You can share via Marketplace or a group. We'll talk more about that in a second. Marketplace can be secure by individual or organization. That's some different models that you can choose. And really, you as the partner control access. So this is another pattern that's exclusive to partners. So in your infrastructure, you maybe have a GIS server that ETLs data over to a hosted feature service in ArcGIS Online. And the second step here is really one of two models. One is you could then, using your ArcGIS Online hosted feature layer, publish that to the marketplace. Choose your licensing model and have customers go to ArcGIS Marketplace, discover your data, and choose to purchase it. Or you can just use what is called group sharing, where you can set up groups that you share your hosted feature service into, and then you can invite users to those groups. who access your content. So both of these patterns are very popular and successful today, and are available to you as a partner. Okay, and then the final pattern is to export data to a service. So you can create data from an app or an add-in. So this app or add-in just enables customers to export data. You can export data using tokens, and you can optionally store a token to refresh data. So again, from your infrastructure in the customer's GIS, the first thing is to actually get the user to authenticate so that you're able to access their GIS. You can bring in consumed services in. You have the ability then to ETL data to that customer's GIS. And also the customer has the ability from your applications, you can provide export tools. So maybe they are clipping an area of interest and exporting that data out for them to use in their desktop app or in their GIS. So you have a few options there when it comes to just exporting data coming from your service. And it's really about end user, what they prefer. And you have the ability to, again, just ETL data over to that customer's GIS, and you could keep a token to maybe on a regular basis keep updating that data, or just have users go into your application and have some kind of export experience. Now what we want to do is just do a simple demonstration of how a customer could consume a real-time layer. So in this scenario, I am a organization I'm a partner of Esri who has embedded GeoEvent Server as part of my infrastructure on AWS or Azure. And I'm selling access to a stream service layer. And I'll show you what that looks like. All right, and thank you so much for joining or watching this session. We hope you found it really valuable. You can, if you want to access any of the code that Max showed off here, go to github.com/mpayson/presentations. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to either of us. We're happy to help you with your questions, and just want to thank you for your time.